President Donald Trump asserted executive privilege on the unredacted version of the Mueller report on Wednesday morning. The president's decision was detailed in a statement to reporters from White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. Neither the White House nor Attorney General Barr will comply with Chairman Nadler's unlawful and reckless demands, Sanders wrote, after Barr issued a statement recommending that Trump claim executive privilege. The White House said that Democrats and Nadler were trying to redo the Mueller investigation to distract the country from the booming economy. Faced with Chairman Nadler's blatant abuse of power, and at the Attorney General's request, the president has no other option than to make a protective assertion of executive privilege, the statement read. The White House urged Democrats to move beyond the investigation and focus on more pertinent issues to the American people like the border crisis, prescription drug prices, and infrastructure. It is sad that Chairman Nadler is only interested in pandering to the press and pleasing his radical left constituency, Sanders wrote. Earlier Wednesday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that Barr should be held in contempt of Congress for his refusal to testify to the committee and accused him of lying to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Later Wednesday, Sanders spoke with reporters at the White House pointing out that there was already a less redacted version of the Mueller report available to Congress that Democrats were ignoring. Not a single Democrat has even taken the time to go and look at it, she said. They're asking for information that they know they can't have. She said that Barr was legally prevented from giving Congress the unredacted version of the Mueller report, which would reveal the grand jury information. Chairman Nadler is asking the Attorney General of the United States to break the law and commit a crime by releasing information that he knows he has no legal authority to have, Sanders said. It's truly outrageous and absurd what the chairman is doing, and he should be embarrassed by his behavior. The House Judiciary Committee will vote Wednesday on a resolution to hold Attorney General William Barr in contempt of Congress for refusing to hand over Special Counsel Robert Mueller's unredacted report and its underlying evidence. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler, DNY, announced Monday that the committee will consider a contempt citation against Barr, which if passed by the committee, would send the measure to the House for consideration later in May. Nadler launched its own investigation into potential allegations that President Donald Trump obstructed charges based on public corruption and other abuses of power by Trump. House Judiciary Committee Ranking Member Doug Collins, ARGA, slammed Democrats' cynical move to subpoena the unredacted Mueller, contending that complying with the subpoena would break the law. Democrats have launched a proxy war smearing the Attorney General when their anger actually lies with the President and the special counsel, who found neither conspiracy nor obstruction, Collins said in a statement Monday. Former FBI Director Jim Comey on Wednesday defended the FBI's actions in regards to the Donald Trump campaign and a very serious allegation, which Attorney General Bill Barr called spying. Comey said on CBS's This Morning the FBI does not spy, adding that the FBI had cause to investigate the Trump campaign and that Republicans would be fine with the investigations if the FBI had Trump been a Democrat. The FBI doesn't spy, the FBI investigates, said Comey. We investigated a very serious allegation that Americans might be hooked up with the Russian effort to attack our democracy. People just ought to look at the predication for the opening of that investigation. We should have been fired if we didn't investigate this, he emphasized. The United Nations has produced a report warning that 1 million species are threatened with extinction. Here is why you shouldn't take it seriously. It's politics, not science. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which produced the report, is a political organization, not a scientific one. Just like its sister organization the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, in fact. As Donna LaFramboise notes here, both exist purely to give a fake leaf of scientific credibility to the UN's sustainability agenda. When the PS was established in 2010, we were informed point blank that its purpose was to spearhead the battle against the destruction of the natural world. In other words, there's all sorts of deception here. This is no sober scientific body, which examines multiple perspectives, and considers alternative hypotheses. The job of the PS is to muster only one kind of evidence, the kind that promotes UN environmental treaties. That's how the United Nations works, folks. Machinations in the shadows. Camouflaging its political aspirations by dressing them up in 1,800 pages of scientific clothing. This is the usual suspects crying wolf. Again. No one would dispute that habitat loss is a problem for plants and animals. But it's a big stretch from there to suggest that 1 million species are threatened with actual extinction. The E word has long been overplayed by environmentalists because it's so dramatic and final and because everyone has heard of the dodo. There is no evidence whatsoever, though, that the world is heading for its so-called sixth great extinction. As Willis Uschenbach once pertinently asked it, what's up with that? Where are the corpses? Harvard ecologist E.O. Wilson once estimated that up to 50,000 species go extinct every year. How did he calculate this? Using the same method the IPCC uses for its junk science prognostications on catastrophic climate change, computer models. Greenpeace co-founder Patrick Moore exploded this myth long ago. Moore said in 2000, "There's no scientific basis for saying that 50,000 species are going extinct. The only place you can find them is in Edward O. Wilson's computer at Harvard University. They're actually electrons on a hard drive. I want a list of Latin names of actual species." Moore was interviewed by reporter Mark Morano, now with Climate Depot, in the 2000 Amazon rainforest documentary. Environmental activist Tim Keating of Rainforest Relief was asked in the 2000 documentary if he could name any of the alleged 50,000 species that have gone extinct, and he was unable. "No, we can't name them, because we don't know what those species are. But most of the species that we're talking about in those estimates are things like insects and even microorganisms, like bacteria," Keating explained. RIGHT. So there are all these species going extinct. But we don't know what they are because we haven't yet discovered them. Sounds terrible. Let's cancel Western industrial civilization right now, just in case. Seriously, these people are like a stock record. Here, H. an assembler at Homewood's Place, is The Independent from 2006. Life on Earth is facing a major crisis with thousands of species threatened with imminent extinction, a global emergency demanding urgent action. This is the view of 19 of the world's most eminent biodiversity specialists, who have called on governments to establish a political framework to save the planet. Scientists estimate that the current rate at which species are becoming extinct is between 100 and 1,000 times greater than the normal background extinction rate, and say this is all due to human activity. And Larry Gatery, executive director of Diversitas, a Paris-based conservation group, said that the situation was now so grave that an international body with direct links with global leaders was essential. The scientists believe that a body similar to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change could help governments to tackle the continuing loss of species. They get away with presenting it as news every time because the mainstream media is so thoroughly compliant and dutifully bigs up each scare every time it appears. Nature is in its worst shape in human history. This is exactly the kind of scaremongering claim the report was designed to generate. It gives environmental correspondents from on-message outfits like the BBC and CBC the excuse to put in a call to their favorite eco-alarmists, who helpfully respond with hysterical drivel like this. "Humanity unwittingly is attempting to throttle the living planet and humanity's own future," said George Mason University biologist Thomas Lovejoy, who has been called the godfather of biodiversity for his research. Actually, as Patrick Moore notes, there have been many worse times for species extinction. Moore, in an interview with Climate Depot, refuted the claims of the species study. The biggest extinction events in the human era occurred 60,000 years ago when humans arrived in Australia, 10 to 15,000 years ago when humans arrived in the New World, 800 years ago when humans found New Zealand, and 250 years ago when Europeans brought exotic species to the Pacific Islands such as Hawaii, Moore explained. Since species extinction became a broad social concern, coinciding with the extinction of the passenger pigeon, we have done a pretty good job of preventing species extinctions, Moore explained. "I quit my lifelong subscription to National Geographic when they published a similar sixth mass extinction article in February 1999. This, latest journal, Nature article just rehashes this theme," he added. Moore left Greenpeace in 1986 because he felt the organization had become too radical. Polar bears and tigers. By curious coincidence, perhaps the two most overlooked of all doomed species are now enjoying a remarkable recovery, not least because, contrary to the claims of environmentalists, humans actually do care about flora, fauna and diversity and have made great strides in preserving them. It has been a century since the last species of any significance, the passenger pigeon, died out. Almost all the species extinctions that have occurred in the last 2 centuries have been on islands, the result of predation by invasive species such as rats or cats accidentally introduced by sailors. Polar bear populations have exploded from about 5,060 years ago to around 26,000 now, making a mockery of their status as an emblem of man-made environmental catastrophe. Meanwhile, the number of tigers in India has risen dramatically in the last decade, according to the Irish Times. The estimated population of the endangered big cat has increased from 1,411 in 2006 to 2,226 in 2014, according to the report published by the Indian government's National Tiger Conservation Authority. Read the small print. When you get to the bottom of the scaremongering report, the authors show their true colors. Here is the BBC's summary. The study doesn't tell governments what to do, but gives them some pretty strong hints. One big idea is to steer the world away from the limited paradigm of economic growth. They suggest moving away from GDP as a key measure of economic wealth and instead adopting more holistic approaches that would capture quality of life and long-term effects. They argue that our traditional notion of a good quality of life has involved increasing consumption on every level. This has to change. Yes, we're back to our old friends, Agenda 21 and sustainability, the UN's code phrases for a new world order in which technocrats of the international elite impose their globalist agenda of wealth redistribution, regulation, enforced renewables, higher taxes and enforced rationing on sovereign nations in the name of saving the planet. If the UN really cared about species extinction, of course, it would be doing the exact opposite. As Joe Nova points out. 1. The worst pollution is in countries with a low income per capita. When people are hungry they raise forests. The most polluted cities are in places like Ghana, Ukraine, Bangladesh, Zambia, Argentina, and Nigeria. The most deforestation occurs in Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, and Mexico. The worst areas in India and China. 2. Only rich nations have the resources to save the environment. 3. Countries that produce more CO2 are richer. Ignore everything the UN tells you about the environment. It's drivel, and dangerous drivel at that. White House Special Counsel Emmett Flood sent a letter to Attorney General William Barr making clear that President Donald Trump is retaining his legal privileges as partisan Democrats escalate their conflict against the president over the Mueller report. Flood sent the 5-page letter on behalf of the president on April 19, but most media outlets have covered the letter only in the past few days. It shows a White House fully aware that Democrats are waging an all-out war against the Trump presidency. The White House is transitioning from cooperating with Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation to a war footing facing off against congressional Democrats, some of whom are citing the Mueller report as a roadmap for impeaching the president. The letter points out that under the Constitution's separation of powers, Mueller was part of the Justice Department, and therefore part of the executive branch that answers to President Trump. The Mueller investigation was thus an internal review by the administration as far as constitutional principles are involved. By contrast, Congress is a separate branch of government. Because the executive branch is independent of Congress and thus does not answer to the legislative branch, the White House will deal with the congressional investigation in a manner different from Mueller's investigation. The Special Counsel Office report suffers from an extraordinary legal defect. It quite deliberately fails to comply with the requirements of governing law, Flood tells Barr, going on to say the White House wants to make several points crystal clear. Quoting parts of the Mueller report, the letter goes on to explain. What prosecutors are supposed to do is complete an investigation and then either ask the grand jury to return an indictment or decline to charge the case. When prosecutors decline to charge, they make that decision not because they have conclusively determined that no criminal conduct occurred, but rather because they do not believe that the investigated conduct constitutes a crime for which all the elements can be proven to the satisfaction of a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecutors simply are not in the business of exonerating investigated persons. In the American justice system, innocence is presumed. There is never any need for prosecutors to conclusively determine it. Nor is there any place for such a determination. Our country would be a very different, and very dangerous, place if prosecutors applied the Special Counsel Office standard and citizens were obliged to prove conclusively that no criminal conduct occurred. Because they do not belong to our criminal justice vocabulary, the Special Counsel Office's inverted proof standard and exoneration statements can be understood only as political statements, Flood continues. The letter recounts various types of information that President Trump could have withheld by asserting executive privilege, but pointed out that, in the interest of maximizing transparency to serve the public interest, The president did not assert this protection. Flood goes on to explain that President Trump wants to ensure that Barr understands three things. First, that the president's declining to assert executive privilege regarding the report does not mean that he has waived executive privilege going forward. Second, that although President Trump did not claim executive privilege over the Mueller report, he reserves the right to claim privilege over underlying materials like FBI investigation notes. And third, that although the president allowed his advisors to cooperate with Mueller by providing testimony, he may not allow those same advisors to testify before Congress, because the Constitution makes the executive branch separate from the legislative branch, and he does not want to create a precedent that U.S. presidents are subject to congressional oversight. Government officials, with access to classified information, engaged in a campaign of illegal leaks against the president, the letter continues. Many of those leaks were felonies. The White House letter puts all this in the context of the big picture of American civic life. Not so long ago, the idea that a law enforcement official might provide the press with confidential governmental information for the proclaimed purpose of prompting a criminal investigation of an identified individual would have troubled Americans of all political persuasions. That the head of our country's top law enforcement agency has actually done so to the President of the United States should frighten every friend of individual liberty. Under our system of government, unelected executive branch officers and intelligence personnel are supposed to answer to the person elected by the people, the president, and not the other way around. This is not a Democratic or Republican issue, it is a matter of having a government responsible to the people, and, again, not the other way around. In the partisan commotion surrounding the released report, it would be well to remember that what can be done to a president can be done to any of us. Flood concludes by noting that this 2-year saga has hampered the president's efforts to carry out the agenda he was elected to enact and placed a cloud over the presidency which is only now starting to lift. He concludes by saying that all supporters of limited government should be concerned about these things, and asks the letter to be made part of the Justice Department records on this matter.